Hello, Nick Roy. Why don't you tell us who you are and why people might know you?
Nicholas or Nick either works. Usually Nick is what gets thrown out, which is completely fine. I've done that most of my life. But Nicholas Roy, I am a crime analyst, records manager by title is really what it is. Records manager for a police agency in the United States, a very small town one. But more people across the world may know me as the podcast host of Neuro Knowledge. Which is geared towards crime analysts and has a lot of academia as guests that are on, talk about evidence-based policing, as well as owner and operator of Crime Analysis. It is a company I set up in order to do online trainings for emerging law enforcement technologies and get that out there for fellow crime analysts.
What do you think is missing for analysts that you are trying to now provide with your training company and with your podcast?
That is a fantastic question.
There's
a lot. Yeah, I think there ends up being a lot. As I've started my podcast and started speaking with people internationally, there is quite a different level of analytical work going on in different countries, and sometimes even here in the United States, the people who are designated as analysts aren't being used effectively. So usually what I notice that's missing is kind of a centralized area for training. There are great analyst group like the IACA, which is the International Association of Crime Analysts, where there are a lot of people from across the globe connected to, not just analysts themselves, but people in academia, as well as some vendors. So there's kind of a good central spot for a lot of people, but it tends to still be a little bit US based. But with that, I try to provide that instruction that seems to be missing. It's very sporadic. Some of the tools that we may use as analysts that can be leveraged to be more effective and efficient is there. I try to search those out, find them, simplify them down, and then end up having training videos for people online through that Crime Analysis website.
So how did you first move from being an analyst to becoming a podcast host and becoming a trainer of the software bits?
Yeah, to speak to the podcast aspect first, I was listening to a lot of podcasts as they started to grow on my commute to work, which is about 30 minutes, and found that as I looked for crime analysis type material, I wasn't really finding any podcasts for it. It was really true crime based. If there was anything outside of that, I really wasn't finding anything. And so I figured, what better way to kind of get my mindset going while I'm taking the ride into work, and maybe even leave it sometimes, which usually I tend to leave work at work, but to have a podcast for people to get some of that knowledge, to get some more understanding, maybe inspire them a little bit for when they get into the office and be like, hey, I'm going to try this project. I'm going to look up this and use it, because I didn't really know that something like this existed. I didn't know the research was there. And taking upon some of the material to go into conferences when that was still a thing, and seeing some of the speakers that I saw, I realized that there was an opportunity there to inform people of not only the material, but actually hit a greater audience, because not a lot of us have the training dollars to get to some of these conferences. So it was kind of a good merge between whom I've followed and seen at some of these conferences, as well as maybe some of their peers, and then the ability to put it into a podcast. A lot of people started consuming it, and a lot of us, I think, still commute to work at that point. So I leveraged it with a program, Microsoft Access, built out something for my police agency I was working with at the time. And when I showed it to another crime analyst, I'm like, oh, that's great. And I thought I was on track to do exactly what every analyst did. And turns out a lot of analysts know just different sorts of materials and software programs, or just use what already is in place. So her name's Carol Fitzgerald. She actually threw me under the bus, so to speak. So she's like, oh, if you want to go to the conference, you end up presenting on something like this. And that's kind of how it spiraled for me to continue to learn, and then realize that there's not a lot of material sometimes, even on YouTube, Vimeo, any of these other outside sites that have the application of criminal justice or policing to leverage some of these programs. So I just started, again, realizing that there was an opportunity there to help my peers who may have the same struggles that I had, and piece that all together that way.
And how did you start your training school, or the website where you host your training courses?
So this year I made a change after speaking with my mentor. She had a different website set up for coursework, and since that was the material I was presenting, I gave it a quick look for a trial. Originally, I had a WordPress site set up and tried to piece that together, but unfortunately, I think there was room for growth. It wasn't really set up the way I wanted to, and I'm not a web designer by trade, so it was a little flawed, I guess, in my own opinion. So I actually took it from that, which was I think June of 2019. I started that WordPress site, and about June, July of this year, 2020, I ended up putting it into this new site, new format, and I think it's structured a lot better. There's the capability to do it without knowing that web design coding of either Java or HTML or anything fancy like that, to get it in, make it look good, and people can consume the material from there. So jumped it into that spot. That's where it's been. Thankfully, a lot of people have found it and jumped in and gotten some of the training done, and have had no complaints, thankfully, on the structure and how it's formatted, knock on wood. As opposed to the other one, which I had a few like, this isn't really where it's working, and this piece fell over here. And so.
Well, that's how you learn. You need that kind of feedback.
Yeah, I've always, anything to critique and help it along. That way more people get the idea and it flows the way it's supposed to, that I want it to, and make sure that they're receiving it the same way. So.
Excellent. Now, speaking more generically about your main profession, mm-hmm. How would you say, what do police analysts do? How would you describe that profession?
That is a massive general context. Here in the States, unfortunately, I think what ends up happening, what I see happen more often, is that they're underutilized and used only as, in a sense, statisticians. They pull the numbers out of the software programs, the CAD and RMS systems. For those people that don't know, it's computer-aided dispatch and records management system, where all of our data ends up being stored, and turn them around and spit them out and say there was X amount of burglaries within this time frame and this many car stops with this many people being warned versus cited, and spitting out that information, where truly I believe the analytical process should be more for getting that information, but being able to look at it in a more bird's eye view and say, out of these 60 burglaries, X amount were residential. What could we do to curb it? Was it an increase due to let's say a new housing development that came in, and the copper thefts out of those houses? That's what caused the spike. Once people are in those homes, chances are that's going to go away, right? So due to a law change, maybe your assaults turned into aggravated assaults. So now you have an increase, and you have to answer to what is truly happening within your jurisdiction. And being able either to tell the public and community whether you need more resources in some form, or there's nothing to be concerned of in terms of public safety because of it. So it really should be geared towards getting that information and having that ability to root through that data and provide actionable information to your officers, to the public, to the people who make the decisions above the police department, whether you need, again, increased resources. And that's where the analytical realm should be taken to. But unfortunately, again, I think it doesn't end up happening that way.
So you seem to be talking about on the one hand, the extreme of you guys being used as data retrieval personnel.
Right.
Versus
an IT department, yeah.
Yeah, versus what you feel should be happening is to the analysts, they get the data, but then they give you the who, what, where, when, why, and how of it, and
Right.
what does it actually mean. And you then package that information and give it to the decision maker to say, this is what's going on, this is who's doing it, this is where and when it's happening, and this is probably why it's doing it, why this is happening. You go and make a decision. So it's actually quite quite a hand-in-hand process, isn't it, for the analyst and then the decision maker, because it's down to the analyst to provide not just the data but the information and everything that goes around it, the inferences, the meaning of it, to then give to the decision maker so they can do something with it.
Yes. Yeah. Providing context is really what it is, right? And giving context to those raw data, because again, that's where people can make those decisions, the either strategic analysis in some form. You see your increases maybe in some form of crime, and is it really one to be concerned of? Is there something you can put in place with your resources in order to reduce that either public safety issue, the quality of life issue that it might be, and provide the service that you need to accordingly to the people in your community, people that you provide your police services to.
Have you got any examples of where good analysis really advanced case investigation or something in a police force, or an example of really bad analysis where things went wrong?
Yeah, being a small town, I don't unfortunately have any of my own. We do more quality of life than it is crime. I've had a lot of analysts that I speak with, my peers that surround me, that have had, thankfully, some successes. Even had one that we could predict as a success on my show, on my podcast, where the conversation he and I had that we presented in the podcast was one of a robbery series that they were doing analytical work for. And as that continued to grow, and as they started painting that window of opportunity, that pattern that was emerging, they had, thankfully, it was a police department that incorporates their analysts within the police agency itself. So everybody knows that that's a supported function and something that they believe in. They got close to actually apprehending the suspects at that point, and the prediction was in an area of town at the time frame, and fortunately, I guess you can say, those suspects were apprehended before the robbery took place, but in a different spot close by, when they appeared to be ready to go and commit their robbery within their confined area on the map, and it was going to fall within the time frame and date frame. So they can only predict that it was going to happen, but they were able to apprehend the people before it actually even got there. Knock on wood, and thankfully people were already out looking for them within that it was within that window of opportunity that they found in the pattern. So it's there. It's just sometimes people believe that the analytical work and product is going to be nope, exactly at 16, 17 hours on Friday at this exact pinpointed location is going to be where you come across the person and you can nab them at that point. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We all deal with people. So the patterns are there, but sometimes as people are occasionally unpredictable for one reason or another, may break that pattern and move on to something else. Bad analytical process is usually only, I think, because we maybe hurry too much. There was a circumstance in which I don't recall which agency it ended up being, but that's irrelevant anyway, where their prediction again on a map was going to be a house number that didn't exist on the road. And that's, again, part of knowing your community, knowing how far out something is, maybe taking a look at the map before you put out your product and say, so it's going to be at this juncture. This is what, the map is trying to say. We know that doesn't exist, so it might be this, or reworking your analytical product to see what might have pushed maybe that realm outside of the scope of where even the street goes to right at that point. So some of it might be bad data entry. So it's tough to say where bad analysis comes from. But there's definitely an opportunity of maybe unskilled or not reviewing your work, or your data is dirty. So there's a lot of, unfortunately, opportunity to have, I think, bad analysis. So if you have good analysis, you probably have somebody who's really pushed through the sledge in order to get it there for you.
And I think that's probably a case to be made for people, also good analysts, also being trailblazers, because once the word gets out to the decision makers, or even just normal operational police officers, that good analysis can do X, Y, Z for you, or X, Y, Z, as you might say, perhaps. They might get deployed in different ways, and they might get listened to, because the other part is that, it's up to the decision maker to then act on what the analysts say or not act on it. And I think if you have more and more good pieces of analysis and the word gets out, then I guess more will probably be invested in that analytical team, perhaps, in that agency, and it can then become a fertile breeding ground for more good analysis. And obviously there will be bad analysis, because people are always learning, and you learn from mistakes, you learn from successes, and both are necessary. But yeah, like you said, it depends on the context, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just has a very large opportunity to be bad at that point, depending on all of those steps that you have to root through.
And I guess especially when analysts are being used as data retrievers, and they don't have any training in the detection of patterns and the development of inferences, or no knowledge of the decision making of offenders, because it can, if analysts are trained properly, they can be such an asset to investigations. They can come up with some of the profiling that people think only the biggest profilers, people with really, really big scientific names and letters behind their names can do, but actually they would also apply basic principles of and basic understanding of what offenders do. It's as simple as offenders tend to offend in an area they're familiar with. People might think, they wouldn't want to be recognized, they'll probably go somewhere where they don't know the place, but actually they do. So if you've got a series of crimes, look at the ones that were committed first in the series, and they probably live somewhere near there rather than towards the end of the series. And it's just psychological knowledge like that. You can just inject a little bit into the analysis process and then make great advances. But obviously, if they're not being used in that way, if they're not being skilled up in that way, they have few opportunities to prove themselves as worthy, perhaps.
Yeah, and I mean, some of it here, at least, unfortunately, in the States, I think still ends up being people who want to apply traditional policing, which I think has pretty well been proven to be highly ineffective, where, just, well, here's an area and it's had some kind of increase, so go drive around. And it becomes a very, as a lot of people will end up saying, random patrols equal random results, right? So how effective are you really being with your limited resources? And it's hopefully something that will catch on more so, is using analysts in some capacity within agencies in order to alleviate some of that limited resources in terms of budget and manpower. Some places will stop using their cruisers because they're afraid to go through their fueling budget. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully they'll catch on.
Are you aware of a piece of analysis that either you did yourself or that somebody else did that really stood out to you?
In any certain context, are we looking for?
Just thinking of specific for people who are less familiar with analysis, just for them to get a better understanding of the kinds of things that you guys might do.
Sure. There's always quite a bit, and that's sometimes part of the problem too of an analyst having too much on their plate. I guess some of the aspects to pull forward on that would be more, analysts should be, I guess, leveraged again to make actionable information. To go back to some of your kind of profiling aspect you just mentioned, we can be leveraged for intelligence gathering. So anybody who's kind of a general crime analyst will be used to a capacity, if so effectively, by their agency for some of these aspects. So intelligence gathering, so to speak, right? We'll go through social media and what we can find on website searching, and pull forward some of that material, maybe get an idea of if they are a suspect or should be one, and if not, maybe some of their friends in there could be and partake if they already have kind of a suspect name to work off of, or somebody in the area that might fit the MO in a sense of either maybe car brakes. That becomes pretty popular around this time for some reason. Can root through, find out maybe they were in an area at a certain time because they tagged themselves a certain way, right? To go in another realm, one successful aspect I saw was something that goes above and beyond what police work is and law enforcement, where it was a major retailer, and they were having a problem with shoplifting. So what ended up happening was they had their increase, and the analyst went out to this retail store, took a look at the area and tried to put eyes on it and figure out why so many people were shoplifting from the store. And the shoplifting increases came from actual foot traffic. People weren't getting away in vehicles, they were actually running off. And so taking a look at what was going on, a different strategy came from the environment, where the crime analysts themselves looked at it and said, well, you have knee-high shrubbery and no fencing. All these people are taking off on foot because it's easy to do, and then go get lost in the clustered area that this retail store was in. And once the store then put in chest-high fencing and shrubbery, they had a reduction in their shoplifting, people running off on foot. So immediately, just from that one implementation alone, there ended up being a reduction without having to do any extra patrols or anything else. So analysts can be leveraged as well for things like that, by seeing that there is a problem, that there is some kind of increase, and trying to figure out why that might be. And it might not be just for police patrols. So there wasn't even any extra resources or any extra burden, in a sense, for the police department at that point, because it was an environmental change. And sometimes things like that, adding lights, right, some fencing, can decrease the problems and issues that are within our community, without having to burden the police force. So that's sometimes a great way to that analysts have leveraged thinking outside the box, as opposed to thinking within that criminal justice system of how do we be more punitive or arrest more people and show them that we can actually curb this by some kind of scare tactic in the sense of enforcement.
I think that's quite unusual that an analyst was allowed out of the building to do some proactive surveillance. That's pretty unheard of, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately so. It was something when I read it, I was like, oh, that's kind of surprising. But I've known analysts that talk about that. It's like sometimes you have to be in the area to kind of get a good lay of the land, because sometimes it is geographic. And speaking with some people in academia, that's some of what they talk about in terms of doing some GIS analysis is seeing that within the area, the environment itself, not just some setup like that, but geographically where things are positioned, might cause some increase in certain crimes and certain quality of life issues to take place at that point. So it's an interesting idea of analysis by location.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's definitely a lot you can do with that, and especially location. And investigators should definitely always visit the scene, ideally at the time of day that the offense may be occurred. But it's good to see that analysts get to do that as well. And obviously, it's worked wonders in that case, hasn't it?
Yeah, and again, another piece where it should be seen that it doesn't just have to happen in front of a computer screen, right?
Yeah.
Let them go out and take the adventure, and maybe you'll be surprised at what you find.
Do risk assessment. I'm going to go to the local mall.
Right.
How outside of the box. But yeah.
While I'm holiday shopping, I'm going to take a look at the...
Would you say that the profession of analyst has changed in any way over the years?
I would definitely say so. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten a chance to speak to a lot of, I guess you could call them old school analysts, right? Where it was probably still a map on a cork board and pins put in it for where things happen, red pins for this and yellow pins for that. But, obviously the increases of technology and leveraging some of the ones that aren't technically made for whether it's law enforcement, police work, or crime analysis itself, and taking some of those programs and leveraging them for the purpose of, finding those problems, figuring out the thresholds, just gives that ability to have that oversight a lot quicker. And with it, there have obviously become more specialized crime analysts at that point, in terms of, again, whether you need an intelligence analyst and that's all they do. It's not work for a strategic purpose or tactical purpose. It's more so for getting through and finding this person and what they might be associated with or who they might be associated with. You have people who do just those specific jobs themselves of tactical analysis, and those problems that are right up at the forefront, they need to be handling immediately and right away. So I think we see some general aspects still of crime analysis and crime analysts, but now even with the increase of different roles that they can play and more specified roles, just like other officers within policing itself that have those specific roles, the analysts have started coming out that way as well. Some of them just deal with traffic to make sure their accidents and enforcement's being done properly and in the right areas to decrease the probability of accidents that take place. So it's good to see that in some areas that's still growing. And I think from what I understand, the UK and some other countries abroad are leveraging the idea of the crime harm index and realizing, as a more socialist nation as opposed to our own capitalist nation, that people count and the offenders and victims might be somewhat similar, but that might be some of what you deal with instead of here's the crime, how do we curb it? More so, here are the people. The difference being with some of the more socialist countries, you're starting to focus on victim and offender and some of that crime harm index aspect. And whereas here in a capitalist country, we're not focused on those people and providing them help completely, unfortunately, at this point. But I think from the few that I've spoken with, analysts over in the UK, that's starting to be some of the goal, is seeing the relationship of trying to get the help to those people early and see if you can affect a change that way, and help them out before they go into a, I guess in a sense, a life of crime as it gets deemed, unfortunately, but to provide the help there as opposed to just looking at the crimes that are happening and go, oh, well, we need cars here at this point in time, or surveillance done here to watch out for this, as opposed to, hey, this person's starting to pop up. Let's see what's going on and see how we can help them out and kind of get them back on track as a member of society.
That sounds very nice. I wouldn't quite say that this is what is happening here already, but I think it definitely should, because all behavior is rooted in some kind of reasoning, isn't it? And even of offenders and people who do not live their lives well, people who always make bad decisions, well, they could be helped because maybe they haven't been shown how to make good decisions. And I'm such a big advocate of early intervention and a holistic approach. And I think that with an army of counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, mentors, and coaches, we could heal so much pain in society, and that would lead to better health outcomes for everyone, lower demand on the healthcare system. It would lead to lower demand on the criminal justice system, on the mental health system, and it would just be so much better all around. And the demand is there. On the one hand, I've got this image of a bow tie. The demand is there. The supply is there, because a lot of people want to be psychologists and counselors, and they train, and then they're not finding jobs, and it's just this bottleneck in the middle of, well, yeah, but who's going to pay for it? Well, actually, it will pay for itself in the long run. You just need to be brave enough to make the investment and just provide this family support, these social workers, and everything just into this family and all these families and these youngsters, and just make that investment over a generation and then see in the long term. But which politician is going to do that?
Right. And then especially, I mean, here where we're a very punitive country, right? It's still a quarter of the world's prison population is owned by the US, which is bizarrely astronomical for how many countries there are in this world. And the idea of justice, and it's always justice for the victim, but what about the offender? Now, I'm not saying what they did they shouldn't be responsible for, but what about getting that person maybe the help they need, so that way that problem doesn't exist in the future in some form. So
and actually there will be justice towards all the future victims, because we know prison doesn't work. Prison makes people worse. Right. It doesn't deter offending, because it's far too long off, and the kind of people who commit crime are not very rational thinkers. Right. They're not thinking, well, a few months down the line, could I be convicted of this, and how is that going to mess with my college application? They're just thinking, is anyone watching? Yeah. And it's just it doesn't work, and we need to come up with other prospects, and that would then prevent victimization in the first place, so we would have fewer victims. Again, yes, that's a rant for a different discussion.
It's another lengthy discussion in and of itself. Yeah.
I think so. How well do you think operational police and analysts are working together?
Yeah, I think, again, that's the tough part here, at least in the States. I can't speak for anybody else except what I've only heard. And I hope it's kind of growing as a great example in some form. I hope there's some initiative taken, I guess, by other agencies who may see our own New York City Police Department as an example. Right, CompStat became very popular outside of their department after it kind of grew there. But one of the things I don't think people realize is that New York last year, I think 2019, if I remember correctly, they did a big hiring push for analysts. I think they were trying to get 100 analysts hired within the department after having great success with some of their analysts and analytical work that was happening. Obviously, a agency that has some pretty good resources to back it, but at the same time, obviously understanding that they have a need for those analysts and analytical products to request 100 positions to be filled that were purely crime analysts was pretty eye-opening, and at least it should have been across the nation to see that that is something that's definitely necessary. You can't have a better work product, I don't think, without somebody going through and going, this is what's going on. This is probably where these patrol guys should be around this date and time to kind of curb what's going on. These are possibly some of either the guardianship or enforcement roles that they should be implementing when they're there to affect some kind of change. And I mean, other than that, we're just kind of chasing our tails for no reason if you don't have somebody there that says, this is what we have going on and this is probably how we should deal with it. Let's see if it ends up working. If not, we can try another strategy from there. So I mean, that hopefully would end up being the case, and then having people work together seamlessly would be nice. But there's still a lot of pushback from analysts, unfortunately, from the information that I keep hearing from them in terms of, again, doing their role to what they're supposed to be doing, providing that actionable information to where they're just being stat dumps, right? Just putting the information out and people not really knowing how to use them or letting them be used effectively, thus creating, I think, like that pushback right down the line. If you don't have somebody, whether it's your chief or lieutenant or somebody in the higher end backing what an analyst does and can do, then you're just not going to have the buy-in. I think that's still part of the problem outside of some of the major metropolitan areas here in the States, where you just don't usually have the buy-in. So the working together isn't as seamless. There might be a few individuals within the agency that realize and know what an analyst can do, so they end up going knocking on the door or consuming the product that actually gets put out to, you know, be more effective and efficient in their own investigations or patrol times. But I think there's still a little bit of work to be done nationally, but we'll see what happens.
How do you think they could be understood better and integrated better into the whole policing process?
That one, I think, really comes from probably a bigger national head having that buy-in, right? Saying and showing more so of the why they really should have analysts and work with them. One of the other increases I've seen in the last several years was an increase for hiring for FBI analysts as they start putting their analysts to their academy and working with the agents themselves, apparently in Quantico, and working together. I haven't yet, unfortunately, to speak with one of them to see how that worked and functioned. But again, to go back to Andrew Reese, a crime analyst that I spoke with on Nero Knowledge for Roanoke, Virginia Police Department, they actually have their analysts go to the academy and, in a sense, basically like mingle with the officers that are going to be coming out of the academy and working within the agency to show that they're there to be supportive, that they're there to help. They also have the analysts go and speak to the class, the academy class, and tell them what they do, what they're about, and how they can help. And I think that kind of implementation, that kind of buy-in, where it's a side-by-side, we're in this together, I'm not somebody who can't help you. That definitely is somebody that, an agency that has that buy-in at the top level, knowing what is going to be useful. So I really think some of that push ends up being from there. And a lot of analysts, unfortunately, have had to maneuver through that minefield themselves. And thankfully, we've had a couple of wins. So that buy-in from those kind of ground level troops and even some of the detectives and investigators have realized how they've been helped, and now start going to and kind of leaning on the crime analysts themselves. So unfortunately, that's only, right, like that one point of contact that you can do, that person that you're dealing with right there, but somebody from higher up can actually get across that entire agency or multiple agencies depending on their reach at that point.
You provide learning specifically to analysts. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so again, starting last year, July 1st, 2019, I started neurocrime analysis and put a training online, realizing that there was a lack, unfortunately, of solid training to kind of get you from A to Z, right? Or A to Z in this country. So I started it to, again, help my peers with some of the troubles that I struggled with from the beginning. And so the things that I started to learn, it's like, well, you know what? I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one out there with some of these struggles. Somebody else needs to implement this or figure out that or design these things. And how could I best reach out and get them the assistance they need? And so realizing that there are some trainings here and there, and it's kind of sporadic, and sometimes it's just the one and done. I realized that this kind of library of training videos needed to happen, and I really wanted to push forward towards the freeware and open source material, because again, a lot of us have struggles with budgetary constraints. So neurocrime analysis, I developed it, I pushed it to exist because I needed to provide my peers with simplified training for these law enforcement tools, these law enforcement analytical tools that I struggled with, that I know I could be able to help them with now that I knew what I was doing with it. So it's really there as a tool to get them, as a training videos, I should say, and also a tool to get them self-paced learning. They can do it on their time. They don't have to be at a live Zoom from X time on this date and potentially miss it. Was it recorded? So it's there for everybody to pull information from, to do at their pace, to go back through when they need to, and put themselves at a greater position to be effective and efficient by leveraging and learning how to leverage these law enforcement analytical tools.
Well, that sounds good, and there's definitely a need for it. Have you found that there's been a good uptake? Are people thirsty for it, or are you facing problems with perhaps whether analysts are happy to invest in that themselves, given that it probably won't give them a financial payoff, or are you finding that police agencies are quite happy to fund that training?
Some of both. I'm trying to grow into the space too, where they fund their own training. Because it is somewhat personal growth as well, right? We need to invest in ourselves to continue to invest further. And but some agencies will pay for the training, and depends on, again, their own budgetary constraints. But with mine, I've grown the training to be continuous and all-encompassing. It's not ending, right? And there's been an uptick in interest in different programs, and that's why I continue to put out more material, because knowing that there's these programs that they can use and leverage to streamline their jobs, to make them more effective and efficient for their agency, which obviously means that they're doing more so for their community, gives them the time sometimes even to provide the more of the analytical work that they want to do, that can come out of that. So, going from A to B and putting that data flow into its own kind of automated process and working from there, and pulling your data more seamlessly, so that way you can then take a look at it and be productive in analytical work, as opposed to being that stat dump, unfortunately, I think is the best way to go. And we can provide a lot more by leveraging technology. Unfortunately, some things are high-end cost, but that's why I use and leverage some of the freeware and open source material, so that way all of us can actually get it, download it, and start leveraging it for that purpose.
If you could wave a magic wand to improve something for police analysis or about analysis, what would it be?
Waving the magic wand. I love this one. So I think really more so it ends up being the concept of having that greater acceptance and understanding of what the crime analyst duties are and having that greater buy-in. So for me, I know analysts want to put in the work and get things done. That's, I guess, a blessing and a curse for crime analysts, where I just want to dig in and provide the help that we need. So it is really more so from the outside. I think when we have that greater acceptance and understanding, then we can throttle forward even further into the work that we do. So that really would be the magic wand aspect of that acceptance and understanding by our own agencies as well as the general public.
Nick Roy of the Neuro Knowledge Podcast, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found this content useful. You can get access to each episode's transcript with key learning points, timestamps, and references if you get yourself onto my mailing list. Just go to the main website on policesciencedoctor.com, and on the bottom of each page you will find a sign-up form for notifications of new content. Just enter your first name, your preferred email address, and the type of organization you work for. You will not get any spam. This is just for me to let you know about new content and for you to get access to all the transcripts.